I swapped my cheating wife's lube for glue, and the man in her bed broke my daughter's heart too. They say revenge should burn only the guilty, but sometimes the fire forgets its aim. I found the proof under her seat, and I didn't explode. I just waited, because the silence before revenge is louder than any scream. There are houses that look calm from the outside. Trimmed hedges, painted mailboxes, curtains that always fall just right. But calm can be a costume. Ours was. On Alder Street, people thought we were the kind of family that smiled through everything. And maybe we were once, before betrayal started borrowing our voices. My name is David Hartley, 48. Civil engineer. Builder of things meant to last. And that's the part that hurts the most. I built everything around me to endure time, but I never imagined my own home would collapse from the inside. My wife Lorna was 45 and carried herself like life owed her attention. She was laughter at dinner parties, the friend everyone envied for her glow, the woman who could make any story sound like victory. I fell for that brightness 20 years ago when we met at a construction expo, me explaining bridge loads, her pretending to understand, her smile steady enough to make math sound romantic. We built a life in symmetry. 1 house, 2 kids, 3 decades of pretending to have it all figured out. But life has ways of tilting the scale. Our eldest, Anna, was 22, bright, fiery, a literature major who quoted lines that felt older than her years. And she had just gotten engaged to a man named Ethan Walsh, polite, ambitious, too perfect in that prepackaged, polite smile kind of way. When I met Ethan, I shook his hand and thought he looks like he reads scripts before speaking. The kind of man who says sir too easily, who studies approval. Still, he made my daughter happy. And a father will forgive many things in the name of his child's laughter. The first tremor came on a Sunday morning. Lorna left early for her book club. Something she'd been doing for months now. She came back glowing. Not in the way sunlight makes people glow, but in the way lies heat the skin. She smelled like perfume that didn't belong to her shelf. I knew because I'd bought every one of them. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Men like me, men who build bridges and solve equations, we don't explode. We calculate. That evening Anna came over for dinner. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about Ethan. How he'd taken her on a surprise trip to the lake. How he talked about saving for a home. How Mom had been helping him with surprise wedding planning. Lorna nodded along, performing her role like she was auditioning for a better life. I watched her fingers. They trembled when she picked up her wine glass. I watched Ethan's name sit on her lips too comfortably. There are tiny tells, cracks that appear before the storm. And I saw every one of them. 2 days later I found the clue, or rather it found me. I was vacuuming the car before work, when the seatbelt caught something under the passenger seat. A tube. Sleek. Silver. Not ours. I turned it over in my hand, reading the words that made my stomach twist. Not lotion. Not lip gloss. Not a mistake. A product for pleasure. The kind of thing a husband doesn't find in his wife's car, unless he's already lost her in another man's arms. But that wasn't what broke me. It was the small detail on the tube, an initial sticker, faint but there. EW. I froze. Ethan Walsh. At first, my brain refused to pair the letters with the face of the man who called me sir. My daughter's fiancé. The man who had dinner in my house last week, laughing at my jokes, complimenting Lorna's cooking, thanking her for raising such a wonderful woman. The air turned heavy. My throat burned. But rage didn't come yet. What came instead was disbelief. That soft, mocking silence where your mind maybe it wasn't his. Maybe he borrowed her car. Maybe. But truth doesn't bargain. Truth just waits. That night I watched Lorna sleep beside me, her breathing steady, her face peaceful, her hand resting inches from mine. I used to think that meant love. Now it looked like the calm of someone who thought she'd never be caught. I didn't touch her. I didn't move. I just stared at the ceiling until dawn drew its first thin line across our room, and I promised myself one thing. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I would balance the scales. The next morning, I woke up before her and brewed coffee the way I always did. Same mug. Same spoon. Same rhythm. She came into the kitchen humming. God, she was humming and kissed my cheek. Morning, she said. Heading to the gym early. I nodded. My mouth smiled but my soul didn't. The door shut behind her, and I watched her car drive away. I sat there, coffee growing cold, eyes on the clock. I waited an hour, then two. Then I picked up my keys and followed the road I knew too well, the one that leads to the edge of town, where secrets have rented rooms before. Her car was there, parked behind the motel sign whose vacancy light flickered like guilt trying to disguise itself. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I watched her silhouette through the blinds, two figures, one betrayal. When she left, her hair was messy, her laughter reckless. And as she walked past me, still adjusting her coat, she didn't even notice the car parked across the street. I sat there another 10 minutes watching the motel door. Then it opened again. And Ethan walked out. That was the first time I truly felt my hands shake. The man who promised my daughter forever was the same man sharing my wife's bed. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The weight of it all pressed on my chest, a collapse from within. It wasn't jealousy anymore. It was desecration. They didn't just betray me. That night I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. But I could plan. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't rage. It's architecture. And I was an engineer. Lorna came home late, kissed me on the forehead, and whispered something about deadlines. I nodded, my face calm, my heart a furnace. When she went to shower, I walked to her bedside drawer. The same one she thought I'd never open. Inside the tube. The same one I'd found in the car. She'd brought it home. That's when the idea arrived. Not in words, in clarity. I looked at that tube and saw the entire plan unfold in my mind, frame by frame. A clean swap. No yelling. No threats. Just poetic justice. Her body caught in the same trap she'd built for my trust. I placed the tube back untouched. I didn't act that night. I wanted the revenge to mean something, not just to hurt. Because if betrayal is a wound, revenge should be surgery. Precise, patient, deliberate. As she slept, I walked to my workshop in the garage, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines, the smell of metal and sawdust. Every tool on that bench had built something in this house, every cabinet, every frame. And soon one of them would build something else, the moment she'd never forget. I stood there, hands steady now, thinking not about punishment but about symmetry. She had taken from me and from our daughter something sacred, something that doesn't grow back. So I told myself I'll give her something she'll never wash away. And for the first time since finding that tube, I smiled, not because I was free, but because I finally understood the math of betrayal. Every action deserves a reaction. Every lie earns its echo. And every quiet man has a limit. Mine had just arrived. The night I decided to stop being reasonable, the house felt like a stage waiting for the curtain to rise. Lamps pulled light into obedient circles, the hallway exhaled its usual hush, and the wall clock rehearsed the same second again and again like it had been cast as time itself. I stood in the doorway of my workshop and let the room take my measure. Every ruler, square, and caliper had once helped me keep the world straight. Tonight they would measure something crooked. I pulled out my project ledger. Not for the notes, for the ritual. Title, line, date, a neat underline. Then I wrote a single word, balance. Under it, a list. Not steps, guarantees. Number 1, proof, confirmed. Number 2, silence, maintained. Number 3, timing, controlled. Number 4, exposure, inevitable. Number 5, exit, clean. I wasn't building a trap as much as I was building a clock. Every tooth of the gear would fit another. It had to. Rage is messy, engineering is not. Across town, rooms I couldn't see were already moving along their own rails. In one of them, my daughter Anna sat on her bed, practicing a speech about centerpiece flowers and seating charts, unaware that the color she'd picked for napkins would end up representing something else entirely. The precise shade of trust before someone turns off the lights. Parallel lines, that's what the night felt like. In one, my wife Lorna texted the person she had learned to prioritize. In the other, I sharpened pencils and drew diagrams that looked like furniture plans and were nothing of the sort. Each line moved forward, unaware of the intersection marked on a calendar none of us had admitted we kept. I started with proof because proof calms the part of a man that fears he is only guessing. The motel log would be enough for a spectator, not for me. I created a private chain of custody, timestamps of her car leaving and returning, the door camera never blinks, bank statements with coincident charges, the faint ghost of a keycard receipt from his tech office found in our laundry, ink lifted cold from cotton with the same trick we used on smudged plan sets. I didn't need a courtroom standard. I needed mine. When I had it in a folder, I sealed it and wrote for Anna. I hid it in the floor safe behind the false dryer panel. The first time I'd ever used that space for anything other than passports and the few cash stacks the cautious keep for storms. Silence meant rehearsing small talk. It meant nodding through Lorna's gym alibis, complimenting a roast chicken I didn't taste, laughing at a neighbor's joke I didn't hear. Silence is a tool that looks like patience and works like wire. I wrapped it around everything. Timing required reconnaissance and a metronome. The metronome was literal, an old dark walnut triangle from my college days that kept me awake during late-night trust calculations. I set it to a slow and dispassionate 60 beats per minute, and let its tick carve the night into rooms I could stand inside. On one notepad I mapped Lorna's rhythms the way you map a tide: Mondays for spin, Wednesdays for book club, Fridays for client social. On another I mapped Ethan, his gym posts, his startups demo days, the Thursday lunches he documented with such disciplined vanity. Men who pretend to be mysterious love calendars. The exposure phase was never about spectacle. I didn't want shouting or chasing or a brawl in a parking lot that would lower the whole thing into something small. I wanted a moment that would announce itself in fluorescent light and paperwork, and the click of a door that only unlocks from the outside. Not because I liked humiliation, but because the kind of betrayal they had built deserved to be seen by someone in a lab coat who would write the true words and make both of them sign. And the exit, that was the hardest draft of all. Leaving without collapsing a life is like deconstructing a bridge without dropping steel into the river. You remove load, add temporary supports, loosen bolts in an order that keeps gravity your partner. I made a private checklist for the day after: call the attorney, freeze the joint accounts, text Anna before the story found her, and hand her the folder I had labeled. Exit also meant preparing to face what comes after justice, a room where nobody claps. I slept an hour. A room where nobody claps. I slept an hour. Not because I was tired, because I wanted morning to believe I respected it. At 7 my phone chimed. A text from Lorna. Spin class and errands. Need anything? I replied, we're out of coffee filters. Number 4. She sent a heart. It looked like a sticker on a stolen suitcase. I went to the garage. I prepared the swap without touching anything that would make this story unrepeatable here. Think of it as an engineer's metaphor, a decoy placed where a thief expects treasure. A counterfeit with the right face and the wrong soul. The symbolic exchange took precision, not cruelty. There would be no blood on my hands, just the inevitability of a choice returning to its maker. When the work was finished, the workshop smelled faintly of alcohol and apology. I returned everything to the exact angle I found it. The drawers travel, the blankets fold, the pencils lie. The point of precision is not neatness, it's deniability. When Lorna came home, she breezed through the entryway and tossed me the filters like we were a team that still knew how to pass. Dinner with Kira tonight, she said. Late. Have fun, I said. Tell her I said hi. She knows you're swamped, she smiled. I smiled back, and for a moment it felt like we were both extras in the life of strangers who look like us. I kept working my parallel line. I met Anna for lunch at the deli near her campus, sat at our usual corner table, and watched her fight for a poem she loved that her professor had misunderstood. She gestured with her hands the way she did when she was 7 and explaining how to make a kite's tail catch wind. When she mentioned Ethan, I studied my napkin. He's coming by later, she said. Mom's helping him pick tie fabrics. Of course she is, I thought. You want me to swing past the gallery after 5? I have a site meeting nearby. Maybe, she said. You okay, Dad? Yeah, I answered too quickly. Just lots of work. She studied me. She had inherited her mother's way of reading rooms and not letting on. Bring that bread I like, she said. The one with all the seeds. Done. When she left, she hugged me and I breathed in her shampoo and tried to anchor myself to a scent that had not yet been rewritten by someone's carelessness. That evening I ran the dry rehearsal. Not the act, the air. I walked through the house as if I were an inspector issuing a certificate of occupancy for a storm. I checked cameras, the ones I'd installed after the neighborhood break-ins. I checked the car dash cam, a just-in-case purchase from years ago that people forget is always learning your life by watching the road in front of you. I set alerts to silent. A man preparing to break his own heart should not be startled by his phone. At 9:30, a text arrived not meant for me. Mistakes are the patron saints of the betrayed. Lorna must have been rushing. A thread meant for E landed in our family group chat, then vanished. The alert flashed and the bubble disappeared, but the preview line had already given me the only word I needed. Room. I didn't confront her. I made tea. 10 minutes later, the garage door opened, footsteps crossed laminate softly, her lipstick paced the sink, and my wife said she was tired. You were out, she said. Walk? I lied. She kissed my cheek. It felt like someone borrowing my skin to do an old trick. I waited until the house hushed and then I went back to the workshop and stared at the ledger. Timing. The next night would do. Friday. Their favorite. I did one more ruthless thing. I called Ethan. 2 rings. Sir. He answered bright, performative. Calling to check on the roof leak at your place, I said blandly, channeling the voice I used with city inspectors. We had that big rain Monday. You good? Oh yeah, we're fine, he stammered. Thanks for thinking of us. As casual as humidity. Actually, just heading out. Late gym. Keep at it, I said. Anna's lucky to have a man who takes care of himself. He laughed, a nervous metronome. Trying to be worthy, sir. See you Sunday, I said and hung up. Every lie creates its own traffic pattern. You only have to stand on the overpass and watch the red lights to see where the jam will be. Friday arrived wearing its normal clothes. I made breakfast. Lorna complimented the eggs. I told her I had a site walkthrough across town that evening and might be late. She told me not to wait up. We set down our utensils at the same time. Synchronized swimmers drowning separately. All afternoon the plan shifted from drawing to structure. I prepositioned the folder for Anna, not on top of the safe, too dramatic, but in the office credenza under the scanner, the place she'd go when she thought she needed to copy something for the venue contract. I pre-packed an overnight bag, socks, a blue shirt, the phone charger I always forget, and placed it in the trunk like a man who anticipates evacuation without calling the fire truck. I sent 3 work emails that made it look like I was chasing a permit. I left a voicemail for the attorney I hadn't needed in a decade. No rush. Monday's fine. Just want to discuss a property matter. At 6:12 p.m. her text. Running late. Don't wait dinner. At 6:13 p.m. his Instagram story, a photo of a treadmill screen with the corner of a hotel lamp reflected in it. It takes a special kind of arrogance to forget that glass tells the truth. I let 20 minutes pass. I drove. I parked far like a man who prefers walking to confession. The motel's neon coughed itself awake against the dusk. I didn't need to see them enter. I knew their cadence now. I watched the door that matched the number I'd learned by accident 2 weeks earlier when a maid knocked the wrong room and laughed to herself as she corrected course. I waited until the hallway camera pinged gently in my pocket. Then I went home because the blueprint required symmetry, my roof, my rules. She returned at 9:47 p.m. The garage door's hum was ordinary. The way my heart folded itself was not. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen in my hand like a father grading papers and looked up as she came in, cheeks bright with the weather of someone else's room. How was the site? She asked. Dull, I said. How was Kira? We didn't end up meeting, she said smoothly. She had a migraine. Ah, I nodded. Hope she feels better. She poured water with the care of a person making sure it doesn't splash on a white shirt. She kissed my head again. 2 points on a circle that no longer shared a radius. I didn't sleep. The timing gear clicked forward in its casing. At 6:10 a.m. her alarm sang. At 6:12 the shower. At 6:30 the closet door. At 6:37 the drawer. And then the sound you can't teach a man to recognize until he has engineered his way to it, a tiny gasp that retires 1,000 alibis. I stayed seated. I let the house be the one to answer her questions. Down the hall water ran. A cabinet opened. A footstep hesitated. The silence grew a backbone. At 6:44, the front door closed harder than usual. At 6:46 my phone vibrated with a call from an unknown number that knew me and wanted something, a voice too calm for the hour, identifying a facility by its street and the letters R. I stood up, put on my jacket, and let gravity pull me to the car. The steering wheel felt like a lever I could pull to rewind a film. It wasn't. Hospitals are bright the way lies are shiny. They blind you long enough to get your signature. I walked into admissions and gave my name, then hers, then the way my mouth made an O without sound when the registrar said, She's with another party. I didn't ask which. I knew. The corridor means that prefer to think in numbers. A nurse guided me to a family area, the room the world uses when it doesn't want to disturb the people doing the real work. I sat in a chair that had been taught how to comfort without promising anything. A television in the corner silently displayed a chef using knives like a lullaby. On the wall, a framed poster reminded me to speak kindly to staff. 20 minutes later, a doctor with eyes trained to do mercy walked in and asked my name again, then asked a question that turned my plan into evidence. Mr. Hartley, can you tell me if there is any chance your wife's situation involves a product that may have been altered? He didn't say swap. He didn't say glue. The air held those words for him so he could keep his license. I thought of confessing. Not to him, to myself. In that second, I felt the blueprint tilt on its bolts. I had wanted exposure, and exposure had a smell. Antiseptic and moral math. He waited. I shook my head. Not a lie, not a truth. A bridge between them that groaned. All right, he said softly. We've seen variations. We'll proceed carefully. He paused. There's also someone else here. Do you want him to leave? My plan had imagined humiliation like a beam you set and forget. It hadn't considered the acoustics of another man's breath in the same corridor. No, I said. The word surprised me. Let him stay. He belongs to the evidence. The doctor nodded and left. The clock argued with itself in the corner. I felt a presence before I saw him. Ethan, trying very hard to carry himself like a man who belongs in the daylight at a place like this. He sat 2 chairs down. He didn't speak. Neither did I. The television showed steam lifting from a pan like a ghost leaving a room that never believed in ghosts. Ethan cleared his throat. Sir, he said. I raised a hand. You don't call me that anymore. He swallowed. David, his shoes immaculate even now. I breathed in and measured the silence like a span. How long? His jaw moved once. Months. How long with my wife? I clarified, letting precision sit in the air like a steel tape. He closed his eyes. Since July. Since before you asked Anna to marry you, I said, not as a question. He nodded. Did you love her? I asked, still not giving Lorna a title. He flinched. You thought you were owed a story where your appetite makes sense, I said, hearing a counselor's voice I hadn't met yet. He didn't answer. A nurse leaned in. We're assisting. It may take some time. The posters on the wall pretended to be calm for me. I stood, walked to the water cooler, poured a cup, and watched a bubble rise and pop like a small blueprint of cause and effect. The corridor filled with the soft throb of machines doing perfect work for imperfect people. I sat again and did the ugliest, most honest audit of my life. Where did my plan end and my cruelty begin? Had I traded one desecration for another? Could revenge be precise and still be sin? Ethan spoke into his hands. I'm sorry. For which person? I asked. Name them so it counts. He stared at the floor. For Anna, he said first, and I almost believed he meant it. For you, he added it like a postscript. And for the woman you took from your future and from mine? I said. He looked at the nurse's station light. For her, he whispered. The door opened. The doctor again, wearing that tired kindness people put on when they prefer a world without nights like this. We've managed the immediate complications, he said, eyes professional, language neutral. No lasting physical damage expected. He paused the length of a heartbeat. There will be reporting. Another pause. Encom report was waiting at home in a folder with my daughter's name on it. He didn't know that the only conversation that mattered would happen in a small kitchen, with a window that shows mourning like forgiveness before it learns the rules. Can she see anyone? I asked. Not yet, he said. Give us an hour. He studied me. You may also want to consider bringing a support person. I thought of Anna. The folder had weight in my mind. I will, I said. My voice felt like gravel arranged into a road. Ethan stood, wanting to move, not knowing where. I should. You should sit, I said. You should think about how you explain yourself using verbs instead of excuses. He sat. He began to shake, the way men do when the mirror won't lower. I walked to the far window at the end of the corridor. The parking lot offered itself as a gray grid. Each car a small life paused. A janitor pushed a yellow cart. wheels squeaking in 4/4 time. In the glass, I watched myself trying to decide whether justice had just become its own crime scene. I called Anna. "Dad," she answered, bright then wary. "Can you come to Northridge Medical?" I asked. "What happened?" "Mom had a complication." "She's okay. We need to talk." Silence. Then, "I'm on my way." "Don't call Ethan," I said. "Why would I?" "Please," I said. She heard something in my voice I hadn't meant to lend to it. "Okay." I hung up and breathed. I had built timing to control events. The universe retaliated by reminding me that people are not beams. They sway. They split. They surprise you. Lorna's sister texted, "Heard something happened?" I put the phone face down and let the question evaporate. An hour and 7 minutes later, a nurse told me Lorna was awake, groggy, no visitors yet. I thanked her and did not ask for favors. I walked back to the chair. Ethan had his face in his hands again, elbow he doesn't believe in. "You're going to tell her," I said. He looked up startled. "What?" "You'll tell Anna," I repeated. "Not in some curated confession with disclaimers. You'll tell her the first true sentence you've said in months. I betrayed you with your mother." He turned the color of paper. "She'll." "I don't know what she'll." "You're not in charge of how she reacts," I said. "Your choices built a room. She gets to decide whether to walk in, burn it down, or leave you inside it." He nodded, broken in the right places and the wrong ones. In the chapel, I washed my face in the quiet. I am not a religious man in the way the word expects. I believe, however, in rooms built for listening. I sat. I didn't pray. I made a promise to the air. If the fire I set spreads to Anna more than the betrayal already would have, I will lay down my pride before the ash cools. When I came back, Anna stood at the end of the corridor in a blue sweater, hair pulled back, eyes carrying 1,000 questions with good posture. She walked toward me fast, then slowed as if the hallway itself had turned to a different material. "Dad." "She's okay," I said. "Physically." "She's okay. What does that mean?" "It means we need to talk before you go in." She looked past me toward the nurses, toward the door with letters that always make people learn new definitions for common words. "Is she dying?" "No," I said. "And I need you to trust me for 5 minutes." She studied my face like a blueprint with the wrong scale. "Okay." I led her into the small conference room next to the family area. Inside, a table with veneer pretending to be wood and 4 chairs that could survive a war. I shut the door. I stood on one side of the table. She stood on the other. We were a diagram of a bridge not yet built. "Dad," she said again softly now. "What is this?" I handed her the key from my pocket. "When you get home, the scanner. It has proof of something I can't say without ruining the sound of my own voice for you. You'll read it. You'll decide what you need. But there's one part one won't hide. Ethan is here." Her eyes flicked, a bird hitting glass. "Why?" "Because he belongs to the room that hurt her." She opened and closed her mouth, air making a small sound that will haunt me longer than any ambulance siren. "He belongs to," she stopped. Words rearranged themselves behind her eyes until they formed a sentence nobody should have to speak. "He belongs to Mom." We stood with that. We didn't move. I watched the girl I taught to ride a bike learn how to stand in a room that had just subtracted its floor. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have told you sooner. I thought I could manage the fire." She didn't cry. She breathed like a runner at the end of a race who chooses not to collapse. "I'm going to see her," she said. "Wait." "For what?" "For me to tell you one thing I learned too late," I said. "Revenge is a kind of architecture that doesn't pass inspection. Even when it stands, it fails the people who have to live under it." She stared at me, searching my face for a confession I hadn't packaged. "What did you do?" "I made sure the truth would come into a room that writes things down," I said. "I didn't touch her. I touched the circumstances." "You mean you?" "I mean the truth is here," I said. "And I will answer for how it arrived." She walked past me, hand on the doorknob, then stopped. "You loved her," she said without turning. I couldn't tell if she meant her mother or herself. "Yes," I said. She nodded once and left the room. I followed at a distance that felt like a verdict. At the family area, Ethan stood when Anna appeared. He tried to say her name. It sounded like a word that had grown too heavy for his mouth. She didn't look at him. She spoke to the nurse. I'm her daughter. The nurse guided her through the door's soft. Ethan sat again. I took the chair 5 feet away. We waited. The television showed cupcakes that would never be baked again by the person who had once promised to make them for a shower. The air conditioning whispered like a secret practicing remorse. After a while the door opened. Anna emerged with a face that had selected which muscles to use and which to retire. She walked straight to Ethan. He stood up slowly, like someone learning gravity's rules for the first time. She didn't hit him. She didn't scream. She did something worse. Follow me, she said. They went to the same small conference room. I stayed outside. I didn't need to hear the sentences. I knew their shape. Through the glass I saw her stand, him sit, her speak with a still hand on the table, the posture of someone who has decided to be her own weather. When she finished, he tried to touch her wrist. She stepped back. He folded. The room held it without comment. 10 minutes later, Ethan left the hospital with his head down and his hands empty. No bag. No woman. No future that looked like the brochure. As he passed me, he opened his mouth once, then closed it, then kept walking. The sliding doors sighed the way doors do when they apologize for letting in the wrong people. Anna came back to me and leaned against the wall. She asked me to tell you she doesn't want you in there, she said. I understand, I said. The words had been waiting for months. She asked me to tell you something else. What? She said she never thought you could be cruel. I absorbed it. Cruelty is not a word that had ever sat in my chair. I let it take the seat. What do you need, kiddo? I asked. I need to go home, she said. I need to read whatever you left. I need to take the pictures off my wall and not throw them away yet. I'll drive you. I'll take a cab, she said. I want to be alone with the part of me that still wants to be wrong. She nodded. She hugged me once. A careful, correct hug like two musicians tuning the same note from across a room. Then she left. I sat in the chair again. The doctor returned with discharge instructions written in a language invented for the morning after. She'll need space, he added, not as a clinician, as a man who has watched corridors teach families how to stand. We've notified the appropriate channels. You may receive a call. I'll answer, I said. He gave me a look I recognized when inspectors sign off on a structure that meets code but not conscience. Back home, the house waited like a witness. I opened the office credenza and stared at the empty slot where the folder had been. Good. The truth had left the building the correct way. I poured a glass of water and didn't drink it. I walked the perimeter of the living room with the slow certainty of a man checking a fence for cuts he already knows he'll find. On the mantel, the family photo from last spring at the coastal overlook smiled with an optimism that now read as foreshadowing. I took it down and placed it face down on the coffee table. Not a punishment. A pause. The doorbell rang. I knew the weight of that ring. Not a neighbor, not a package, the knock of officialdom. I opened the door to two uniforms who had practiced this conversation so many times it had the shape of furniture. They were respectful, they were thorough, they were inevitable. I told the truth in the order it could be heard. I did not narrate motives. Motives are vanity. I described timing. I described exposure. I described my pledge not to approach her room. When they left, the house exhaled like a patient after anesthesia. Night came. The metronome still ticked on the workshop shelf. I turned it off. Silence filled the space the way water fills a hull breach. I sat at the bench and finally let my hands ache. Engineers will tell you the body remembers a load long after it's been removed. I discovered that night that the soul does too. My phone lit up. A text from an unknown number. You did this. No punctuation. No name. I didn't reply. Some sentences are designed to bounce off you and return to their sender with a dent. Another text, this time from Anna. Got home. Read it. I'm safe. I'll call tomorrow. I breathed for the first time since the corridor. I started to write her a message, then erased it. I wrote instead, I love you. Sleep if you can. A minute later, I love you too. It was the smallest sentence of the day. It was the only one that mattered. I went outside. The street held its breath the way suburbs do when they're waiting to see whose story will put them to sleep. The moon looked like an engineer's lamp turned low. I walked to the driveway and put my palms on the hood of my car and felt the engine cooling. There's a soft ticking as metal gives back the heat it borrowed. I stood with that sound until it joined the symphony of crickets and a distant train declaring its right to pass. In the morning, the first call came from a friend who loved gossip more than empathy. I let it go to voicemail. The second from Lorna's sister. I answered that one and gave her the clinical truth and none of the poetry. She cried the way people do when their house isn't on fire but their smoke detectors are going off. By noon, the attorney returned my call. I told him I needed 2 documents. A separation that respected the law and a letter that respected my daughter. He said words that sounded like paragraphs. I agreed and wrote down the time to sign things I never wanted to own. Late afternoon, the door opened without a knock. Anna. I steadier. She held the folder in one hand, crumpled a little at the edge from being carried like a shield. She sat at the kitchen table and slid it to me. It's thorough, she said. I'm sorry it needed to exist, I answered. I'm not going to see her tonight, she said. That's your right, I said. She asked me to tell you something else, she added, voiler now. She said you never trusted her to be human. I thought about all the ways we had both performed perfection, how we hid our smallness from each other until it found a larger way out. She's right, I said. About some of it. Anna looked at me a long time. Dad, what happens next? We move timing into aftermath, I said. We build a room where the truth doesn't echo as loudly. And Ethan? I gave him a job, I said. Her eyebrows lifted in disbelief that briefly revived her old laughter. What? A sentence to finish, I clarified. He has to tell the truth to every person who asks what happened. No edits. No euphemisms. He'll be speaking that sentence for a very long time. She exhaled. That's a good job for him. We sat in silence until the light shifted and touched the edge of the table like a small apology from a faraway star. She stood to leave. Before she reached the door, she turned. Dad. Yes. Next time, ask for help before you build a bomb. I will, I said. If there is ever a next time, I will build a window instead. After she left, I took the ledger into the yard and set it on the grill. I lit a match. I watched balance become smoke, then charcoal script, then a clean black memory. The metronome stayed on the shelf, silent. I had learned the beat by heart, and somewhere across town under new light, in a room where even the air had revised its opinion, a woman I had loved practiced walking down a hallway without looking for me at the end of it. I could not change her direction. I could only decide what kind of road I would lay for the person I still had a right to build. The father who turns off the fire when the lesson's done. The blueprint had worked. The blueprint had failed. Both sentences were true. I went inside and wrote the opening line of a different plan on a clean page. Make it safe for Anna to remember joy here. Then I underlined it twice and put away the ruler. A week after, everything cracked open, as if the walls had pulled in to listen. Each sound was amplified. Coffee dripping, mail sliding through the slot, the whir of the ceiling fan above the dining table where no one sat. Every hum seemed to measure distance. David moved through the rooms the way you move through a museum after closing, aware that every object belonged to a time that no longer existed. He kept expecting to hear Lorna's voice in the kitchen, the rhythmic way she used to hum while chopping onions, the clatter of her rings against the counter. Instead, only the clock dared to speak. He didn't go to work that week. He sent a message to his assistant, personal emergency, indefinite leave, and turned off the company phone. The first few days he told himself it was exhaustion, but the truth was simpler. He was afraid of the version of himself that would sit across a conference table and pretend to be logical again. Logic had built the blueprint that wrecked them. He wanted nothing more to do with it. The morning after Anna left with the folder, the neighborhood paper landed on the porch with the same soft thud as always. Routine has no conscience. David opened the front door, stared at the roll of newsprint, and left it there. The headlines would be smaller than the one running through his mind. When the police called again, they asked routine questions. He answered them with the precision of a man filing a report about someone else. His statements were factual, his tone neutral. The officer paused near the end and said quietly, "You sound like you're describing a bridge collapse." David almost smiled. That's what it was, he thought. A collapse of load-bearing lies. The house's silence pressed harder at night. He started sleeping on the couch, not because the bed was haunted, but because the couch sat near the window where he could watch the streetlights blink like small, forgiving hearts. Each pulse reminded him that somewhere people were still moving, Still eating. Still saying goodnight without keeping secrets behind their teeth. Anna texted once each morning, short, measured updates. Morning. I'm okay. Don't forget to eat. Sometimes he answered, sometimes he only read them. Once she sent a photo of the ocean and a caption trying to make sense of waves. He didn't ask where she was. He'd learned enough about privacy. By the 5th day, routine began to rebuild itself like weeds between cracks. The neighbor's dog barked at the mailman again. The sprinkler timer came on at dawn. David found himself back in the workshop, not to plan but to sweep. Dust rose and caught in the window light, tiny galaxies turning in quiet gravity. He traced the grain of the workbench where the ledger had burned its ghost. In the ash stain he saw something that looked like the outline of a hand open. He ran his fingers over it and whispered, I know. He made a rule. Every time guilt tried to draft another plan, he would build something harmless instead. The first was a birdhouse, absurdly precise, with dovetail joints and a tiny landing perch. Took him 8 hours. When he finished, he hung it on the oak tree outside Anna's window and watched 2 sparrows inspect the architecture. One hopped inside, then out again, unconvinced. He laughed once, the sound thin but human. Late one afternoon his phone rang. Lorna's number. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity is a quiet kind of courage. David, her voice rasped, small but steady. I'm here. Anna came by today. I know. She told me you're not pressing charges. He closed his eyes. No. I don't understand why. Because I already did enough damage. Silence then. They're saying I should file something. That what you did? What I did was show you what truth feels like when it finally has somewhere to land. She breathed out. It hurts. I know. Do you hate me? He thought for a long moment. No. I hate what we turned into. Another said you built a birdhouse. He almost smiled. She's still reporting on me, huh? She said it looks like one of your bridges, only smaller. That's the idea. Maybe you should build another. The call ended there, not with closure, but with the shared understanding that some structures can't be repaired, only replaced. Days slipped by. David began to walk the neighborhood in the evenings, nodding at familiar strangers. When people greeted him with cautious eyes, he simply said, working through it. The phrase became his scaffolding. One evening, he found Anna waiting on the porch swing, a travel mug in her hands. I figured you'd come by after dark, he said. I didn't want to spook you, she answered. Her voice was calmer, her face older in the way grief matures people. Mom's moving in with Aunt Claire, she said. That's good. She's not angry anymore. Not exactly. She says she's learning what forgiveness costs. Tell her it's expensive, he said softly. I think she knows. They sat in silence for a while, the swing creaking softly. Finally, Anna asked, do you still think revenge balances anything? David shook his head. Revenge is a tool that pretends to be justice. It builds fast, but the foundation cracks the minute you stop holding it up. She said you've always been a builder. I'm trying to learn demolition, he said, half a smile breaking through. Anna reached for his hand. Then start with guilt. It's the ugliest structure in here. He squeezed her fingers. Already drawing the plans. The next morning he drove out to the old bridge project where it all began, the one with his name on the plaque. He parked by the guardrail and leaned against it, listening to the river slap the concrete supports. Water never stops rewriting its path. That thought steadied him. He pulled out a notebook, not the old ledger, a new one. On the first page he wrote, Project number 1, rebuild, forgive where possible. Accept where not. He stayed there until the sun slid behind the ridge, until headlights streaked the bridge and disappeared again. Somewhere behind him the world was already writing new rumors, but they were just echoes now, background noise for a man finally learning to live without blueprints. When he got home, the birdhouse was occupied. 2 tiny silhouettes swayed inside, settling for the night. He stood beneath the tree and whispered, hold steady. Inside, the metronome waited on the shelf. He didn't turn it on. The beat was already inside him now, slower, human, imperfect. The fire had gone out. What remained was the faint smell of smoke and a man sweeping it away, one breath at a time. The morning after the corridor, dawn arrived like an apology no one signed. Light crept across the hardwood with the shy insistence of a child trying not to wake a house that had cried itself empty. David lay on the couch beneath a thin throw, eyes open before color returned to the walls. He noticed small things because small things were all he trusted. The chip on the coffee table edge shaped like a comma, a thread pulled loose from the rug that had learned to curl into a question mark, the dust on the windowsill sketching a pale horizon line the sun would erase and draw again tomorrow. He rose like a man careful not to break surface tension. The kitchen faucet sputtered once before it remembered how to pour. He held a glass under it and let the water run longer than necessary, watching the ripples settle as if calm could be manufactured. The first sip tasted of metal and last night. He set the glass down and listened. The refrigerator hummed. A neighbor's car coughed awake. Somewhere far off, a train declared itself with a single long note that carried more mercy than any sentence he knew how to write. The phone face down on the counter pulsed once, a small square of light against the grain. He turned it over with 2 fingers like it might bite. Anna home. Slept some. Don't overthink breakfast. Don't overthink breakfast. He answered, trying not to think at all. The typing dots appeared, disappeared, returned. Anna, good luck with that. He smiled without permission. The expression didn't know where to sit on his face and wandered before finding a place to rest. He wanted to ask 100 things and none. He put the phone back down, screen dark again, and stood in the doorway to the hall where every picture frame had learned to hold its breath. Their wedding photo, the one with wind in Lorna's veil and his hair still arguing with youth, had been removed last night and left leaning against the wall like a painting awaiting a new room. He didn't step over it. He walked around it wide, as if grief had taped off the area with yellow caution ribbon. He showered in water that took its time getting warm. He dressed without care for color, a gray t-shirt and jeans that remembered a simpler waist. In the mirror he looked like someone auditioning to play himself. He tried the lines, "I am fine." The mirror declined the role. He chose silence. Outside, the street had written itself into trimestered light, shade on the west side, ordinary sun down the middle, a border of leaves keeping their own counsel. He walked with no plan, turning left at the dogwood, right at the house with the perpetual garage sale, straight past the cul-de-sac puckered like a scar at the end of the block. People waved with the restrained warmth of neighbors who suspect the headlines but prefer the weather. He returned the gestures in lowercase. When he reached the small park by the creek, he sat on the second bench, the one that faced upstream, toward the bend where the water braided around a stubborn rock, and then forgot it. The creek did not narrate, it just worked. Don't overthink breakfast, Anna had texted. He cracked a granola bar from his pocket and chewed as if each bite were a math problem. Birds improvised overhead. A cyclist dinged a bell that sounded like a polite version of urgency. His hands wouldn't be still. He pressed them flat on the bench beside him, palms registering the cool of metal worn smooth by weather and waiting. In the rust freckles he saw a map of choices. In the bolt heads he saw the idea that holds weight together. Tighten what keeps, loosen what lets go. It felt like a sermon from a softer God than the one he'd listened to all year. The God of precision, the one who tells you a plan is protection. Plans can be traps you build for yourself and then brag about surviving. He took out a notebook, new not the ledger, and wrote 3 words on the first page. I did this. He waited for shame to drag him under. It didn't. It sat. It looked like him. He added a second line beneath it, smaller, and I can repair. He didn't believe the sentence yet. He wanted to see if it would grow teeth by afternoon. By the time he reached home, the world had begun its noon chorus, leaf blowers, delivery trucks, the low throb of a bass from a teenager determined to be heard by his future. The mail in the box was a democracy of lies and necessities. He carried it inside and sorted envelopes into 3 stacks. Bills, offers, things shaped like verdicts. In the third pile, a windowed letter from the hospital looked up at him with perfect posture. He set it aside. He would open it with a pen ready, not a fist. The workshop called him the way certain rooms do when they remember your breath. He answered, not to tinker with plans but to sweep. He dusted the shelves, wiped the vice jaws clean, coiled the extension cord into a circle that looked like patience. On the pegboard he moved each tool to its outline, hammer, square, level, chisel. The world is kinder when the objects that could hurt you return to their lines. Somewhere in the order a little piece sat down. On the workbench, ash stained the wood in a shape his eye kept reading as a handprint even though he knew it wasn't. He placed his palm over it anyway, aligning fingers with the ghost. I know, he said to no one. The apology didn't aim outward. It settled inside his ribs and started sweeping there too. Afternoon stretched itself long and thin. He made coffee and forgot to drink it. He cleaned the pantry like absolution lived behind the pasta. He stood in the doorway to the room that had been Anna's and measured the air with his eyes. Posters taken down the week she moved out left pale rectangles on the paint. A museum of echoes. On the desk, the little ceramic fox he'd bought her at a fall fair sat angled toward the window as if it preferred the view. He turned it slightly so it looked at the door instead. Watch for her, he said, ridiculous and sincere. The doorbell sounded like a polite alarm. He checked the peephole because he had become the kind of man who checked. A woman in navy, clipboard tucked into the crook of her arm. He opened the door and met the counselor the hospital had recommended when they scribbled aftercare in a margin and circled it twice. Mr. Hartley? I'm Amal. We can reschedule if this is not a good. It's fine, he said. It's just that hospitality feels expensive today. She smiled in a way that didn't try to fix him. We can sit on the porch if inside feels like a courtroom. Porch is perfect. They sat with the rail between them and the small theater of the street beyond it. Amal asked open-ended questions like she was holding a net made of listening. David tried to name things without building a dam of explanation behind every noun. When he faltered, she pointed to the birdhouse. You built that. He nodded. Why? Because there had to be a place in this yard where something small could sleep without fear, he said, surprised to hear Truth step forward so calmly. Good, she said. That's a sentence you can keep. He described the architecture of revenge the way a tour guide reluctantly narrates a ruin he once loved. Amal didn't flinch when the word blueprint appeared. She asked what the plan had promised him. He said, control. She asked what it delivered. He said, a mirror. She nodded, wrote something in the air with her finger like she kept an invisible chalkboard where she stored the important parts of other people's lives. What do you want to be true 6 months from now? She asked. I want my daughter to be able to sit at my table and eat peaches without checking the room for weather, he said. And for you. I want to stop narrating the story where I am either the architect or the debris, he said. She smiled again, this time smaller. There is a third role. Occupant. He stared at the hedge as if it would translate. Live inside my life without redesigning it. Yes, she said. Let some things be ugly and safe. A car slowed in front of the house. A neighbor waved and then remembered his caution and pretended he was shading his eyes from the sun. Amal stood, leaving her card on the arm of the chair. Twice a week at first, she said. You're strong at building. We'll start by practicing staying. He nodded. Staying scares me more than demolition. Then you're in the right class, she said, and went down the steps into late afternoon like someone who trusts sidewalks. When she was gone, David walked back to the kitchen and opened the hospital letter. The language was efficient and bland, which he appreciated. He traced his finger under the phrases that mattered. Follow-up recommended, support services available, no charges at this time. Relief didn't arrive. Something quieter did. Margin. A small space on the page where air lives. The sun slanted low enough to find the far corner of the living room. Dust made a cathedral out of the ordinary. His phone lit on the counter. Anna, mom's with Aunt Claire. She's quieter. I'm making soup. This feels like progress and grief wearing each other's coats. He typed, keep the coats on if they keep you warm. 3 dots. Anna. I found the ceramic fox. He's rotated. Did you talk to him? He looked at the door to her room and let out the smallest laugh of the day. Maybe. Anna, okay. He says hi. He stared at the screen until its light dimmed and his reflection replaced words. Evening came early, dragging with it a wind that lifted leaves and agendas. He stepped outside and the oak above the birdhouse moved like prayer without language. From the street, a boy practicing skate tricks muttered encouragements to his own feet. Somewhere a screen door banged twice, the second time gentler as if it had been told. He grilled a sandwich and ate it standing up, a ritual from younger, hungrier years that fit tonight like a loner coat. He washed the plate immediately, not because it needed to be done, but because completion was the only currency he trusted. He told himself he would go to bed before midnight. He knew he wouldn't. At 10, he opened the window to let night inside. It arrived with crickets and 2 cars arguing about whose muffler mattered. He sat at the dining table that had held birthdays and taxes and a puzzle once that had stolen 3 weeks and given them back in laughter. He opened the notebook again and drew 2 columns. What I broke. What I can fix. Under the first he wrote, trust, quiet, a myth I didn't know I believed. Under the second he paused, then wrote, doors, schedules, the habit of apology. It looked small. It was something. Near 11, his phone vibrated with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail, then answered because the day had taught him to risk interruption. Mr. Hartley? A young male voice, careful. This is Evan from North Ridge. He braced. I was on staff when on your wife's case, the voice continued. I wanted to say, sometimes families ask what they can do for us. The answer is usually nothing. But you sent a note to our floor manager. It was decent. David searched his memory. He had written a simple thank you on the back of a billing page, a habit he'd taught himself during a long-ago winter when a nurse had spoken to him like he was not in the way. We don't get a lot of decent, Evan said. So, thanks. David swallowed the sudden burn. You're doing work the world pretends it doesn't need until it does, he said. Evan chuckled, surprised. That's exactly it. They hung up. David leaned back in his chair and let the compliment pass through him without setting off alarms. Midnight did what midnights do, made everything truer and softer at once. He stood, turned off lights in a sequence that felt like a ceremony, and returned to the couch. He lay on his side, facing the window, and watched a sliver of moon slide behind branches. The house settled. A floorboard confessed every step it had heard. Somewhere a clock forgot a second and caught it on the next minute like a juggler regaining a dropped pin. He woke at 4 to rain. Not a storm, just steady weather rehearsing its lines on the roof. He listened until the sound filled the room, until it reached the part of him that had been waiting for something predictable. He closed his eyes and let it wash the edges of the day. When morning came, he would start what Amal had called staying. Today, he would be a man who makes coffee and answers the door and doesn't redesign the air to control it. In the gray before light, he whispered into the room, testing the feel of the words, I am an occupant. The house, which had always known, answered by not falling down. He slept. The morning after rain always smelled like a confession, cleaner than deserved, quieter than the city expected. David woke to that scent, to a house rinsed by something gentler than time. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was the possibility of it. He made coffee without thought, the kind of muscle memory that reminds a man he still exists. The steam curled up toward the ceiling and vanished into the same air that had once carried arguments, apologies, and half-finished laughter. For the first time, he didn't mind the silence. Silence had stopped being the echo of what was lost and started to sound like rest. A week had passed since Lorna's discharge, and the world had reassembled itself into awkward normalcy. The neighbors mowed, deliveries arrived, and somewhere in another part of town, the woman he had loved was learning to walk through days that didn't include him. He didn't envy her, didn't resent her. What bound them now wasn't marriage or betrayal, but a shared understanding of consequence. By mid-morning, he found himself standing at the window, coffee cooling between his palms. The street was damp, a few children splashing in puddles near the curb, the sort of careless joy only the unscathed understand. He watched them until he could almost remember being that unafraid. His phone buzzed. A message from Anna. Bringing groceries. Don't say no. He smiled, the smallest shift of light inside him. When she arrived, she came without the guarded air of recent days. Her hair was damp from drizzle, her sweater hanging loose, her eyes clearer. She placed 2 bags on the counter and started unpacking, tomatoes, bread, milk, the choreography of caretaking. You don't have to do that, he said. I know, she answered. But I wanted to see if the fridge still opens. They stood side by side, arranging shelves. The rhythm of domesticity was unfamiliar, like learning an old song with new words. When the last bag was empty, she leaned against the counter and watched him. Amal says you're doing the sessions, she said. I am. How's that going? She told me to name my emotions. I told her they all sound like tools. Anna smiled faintly. You'd know their weight, though. Maybe that's the problem. He poured her coffee, the way he used to when she'd come home from late classes. They drank in the same silence that used to separate them. Now it felt companionable, something shared rather than endured. I saw Mom yesterday, Anna said. How is she? Recovering. She's reading again. Not novels, letters. Things she wrote years ago. Find out when she stopped being honest with herself. She will, he said quietly. She said you called. Just once. She appreciated it. David nodded, his throat tight. We were both architects of the same ruin. Courtesy seems like a start. Anna studied him. You don't sound angry anymore. Anger's expensive. Guilt too. I'm trying to live on lighter currency. And revenge. It's a debt I've decided not to collect. She looked out the window at the tree where the birdhouse hung, rain still dripping from its roof. You know, she said, a pair moved in. They sing at dawn. You'd like the sound. I already do, he said. They spent the afternoon cleaning, not because it was dirty but because movement felt like healing disguised as work. They scrubbed, dusted, rearranged. When they reached the living room, Anna lifted the old photo from the floor. You should hang it, she said. Doesn't feel honest anymore. Maybe honesty isn't about pretending it never broke. Maybe it's about showing what survived. She found a hammer, stood on a chair, and rehung the photo. The glass still bore a faint crack from its fall weeks earlier, a fracture across two smiling faces. When she stepped back, the light caught the line, turning it into something that shimmered instead of scarred. That's better, she said. By evening, the house felt less like a witness and more like a participant. They cooked simple food, pasta, garlic, a sauce improvised from whatever the fridge forgave. They ate on the couch, watching an old documentary about bridges. Halfway through, Anna said, You really can't stop building metaphors. It's a condition, he said. It's also your way back. The next morning brought an unexpected email, a request from a local college asking if he would speak at a civil engineering seminar about ethics in design. He almost declined, then stopped. Ethics in design. The phrase was too perfect. He replied with happy to share what happens when design ignores consequence. Days blurred into a rhythm of repair. He attended therapy, wrote letters he didn't send, and on certain afternoons, drove to the park where the creek curved like an open hand. The same bench, the same rock, but the sound of the water was different now, less indictment, more invitation. Sometimes he brought his notebook and wrote small things that might one day become blueprints for living. Listen longer than you explain. Build with the weight you have, not the one you wish for. Revenge is gravity. Forgiveness is balance. One late afternoon, he noticed an elderly couple sitting on the next bench, their hands loosely intertwined. They spoke softly, finishing each other's half-formed thoughts. For a long time he simply watched them, learning again what endurance looks like when it stops pretending to be perfection. As dusk fell, he drove home under a sky the color of old denim. Lights blinked on in the houses that still trusted each other. He parked, walked up the driveway, and found a small envelope tucked under the birdhouse perch. Inside, a note in Lorna's handwriting. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For everything. Maybe we were both waiting for proof instead of peace. Take care of her. L. He read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the new notebook between I did this and an I can repair. It fit perfectly, a missing line in an unfinished paragraph. That night, rain returned, soft and steady. David opened the window again, let the sound fill the house, and whispered to the dark, Stay. He fell asleep to the rhythm of drops on the roof, to the quiet truth that survival isn't loud. It hums. It breathes. It rebuilds when no one's watching. Morning began to keep its promises again, not because anything was fixed, but because David stopped asking Dawn to file paperwork it was never hired to do. He woke before the alarm and let the room declare itself. Four walls, one window, a breath he could count. There was mercy in simple arithmetic. He made coffee, fed the silence a chair, and waited until the heat in the mug matched the warmth behind his eyes. Staying, Amal had said. Today would be practice. Therapy had rearranged the week into new coordinates. Monday and Thursday, Amal's porch office or her small clinic room that smelled of lemon and books. Wednesdays, the college seminar he had accidentally agreed to, teaching second-year students how load, span, and consequence share a table. Friday mornings, the creek bench with the stubborn rock, a private appointment with movement. His calendar used to read like conquest. Now it read like breathing lessons. On Amal's porch, he learned how to answer with the shortest true sentence. When she asked, "Where does it hurt today?" he stopped explaining the history of bridges and said, "Right behind the sternum." When she asked, "What does guilt say when it speaks first?" he answered, "That I should be useful or disappear." She nodded and wrote the word useful on a sticky note, then placed it on the porch rail where the wind tried and failed to steal it. "You can keep that," she said. He stuck it in his notebook between "I did this" and "an I can repair," a fragile bookmark between confession and intention. He started walking site to site again, this time as a visitor to his own work. The Johnson footbridge over the ravine, a project from 8 years ago, wore graffiti now. Hearts, initials, a cartoon sun that had faded into gentleness. He'd once thought defacement. Today he thought coexistence. The structure had survived being seen up close by people with spray paint and opinions that felt like a sermon about a different kind of endurance. At home he gave each room a task. The kitchen, nourishment without negotiation. The living room, conversation only, no debates. The workshop, building for others, not for control. He placed a small card on the workbench and wrote commission list at the top. Commission list at the top. Beneath, names he didn't yet know. Child at shelter, birdhouse. Recovery center, garden. Planter boxes. Clinic porch, bench with armrests easy to grip. He called the front desk at North Ridge and asked if there was a wish list for the waiting area. "A small bookshelf at toddler height," the nurse said, sounding surprised he'd asked. "The plastic bin keeps tipping." He sketched a design that afternoon. Ran a hand over the grain of something that would not betray anyone. Lorna's name lived at the edge of every day like a coastline you can see on clear mornings. He did not sail toward it. He also did not pretend it had sunk. She sent short messages, whether a memory, a line from a book. He replied with the same restraint. When she wrote, "I found our old grocery list in a cookbook. Apples, time, batteries. We used to be ordinary," he typed, "Ordinary is a sanctuary no one measures until the walls move." She answered with a single dot, like a fingertip laid gently on a map. Anna divided her time between her apartment, her part-time work at the gallery, and his house, which she insisted on refusing to call the house. "It's still home," she said, defiant in the right ways. Together they marked the spaces where memory had left traps. Switches their fingers had learned without looking. Chairs that pulled grief up like a splinter. They moved the dining table a foot to the left, and the air breathed easier. They swapped the living room rug with the one in the hallway, and the living room forgot how to nag. "It's ridiculous," she laughed, sweeping the air with her hands like a stage designer. "But it matters." He nodded. In a life rebuilt, every inch counts. News traveled through town at the speed of mouths, but it began to lose interest the way storms do when they realize a roof has learned their language. When the curious asked careful questions in the grocery aisle, David kept to Amal's rule. Shortest true sentence. "We're healing." She's recovering. "We're focused on our daughter's peace." Some blinked at the absence of scandal. Others set their carts in motion again, relieved to be spared the labor of carrying any more of his story than they'd asked for. On Wednesdays, he faced a room full of earnest faces and reminded himself that the word ethics is not an accessory. He didn't bring up his life. He brought up failures in design, balconies that fell because someone misread a code note, levees that betrayed neighborhoods because prophet forgot that water keeps receipts. Near the end of the second lecture, a student raised a hand and asked, "What do you do when you realize you were the problem?" The room went so perfectly quiet that the ventilation became a metronome. David set his pen down. "You catalog the damage without defending yourself," he said. "You stabilize what can collapse today. You build redundancies into your future so one failure can't take out an entire span. And you accept that some sections will remain caution zones forever." He watched the students write it down as if it were a formula. He wanted to tell them it wasn't, it was a vow. A week later, in the clinic waiting room where he planned to install the toddler bookshelf, he met a boy with a plastic dinosaur gripping his thumb. The child stood in front of his drawing, watched a pencil become a shelf, and asked, "Is that a house for books?" "Exactly," David said. "Books are animals that need somewhere kind to sleep." The boy nodded like a small architect and tapped the dinosaur's head to agree. David carried that exchange home like a warm stone in his coat pocket. The letter that would name this act started on a Tuesday night after the rain, At the dining table under the lamp that made paper look more forgiving than skin, he placed 3 sheets in front of him, one for Anna, one for Lorna, one he labeled for the man I used to be. He uncapped his pen, then hesitated. The room waited like a friend who has already decided not to interrupt. He wrote to Anna first, because clarity is an inheritance fathers owe their children. He stayed in nouns and verbs. I built something that hurt us. I thought precision was goodness. I know better now. I am learning to stay without fixing you or the air. If you need space, I will be a wall, not a door. If you need a door, I'll be a hinge that doesn't squeak. He stopped, wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand, and laughed at himself for writing hardware as love letters. Some languages choose you. Love letters. Some languages choose you. To Lorna, he wrote with the care of a man who finally understood that confessions are not currency to buy absolution. We were careless with the ordinary. I set a match to a room that was already smoking. I will not rewrite the past to save face, and I will not ask you to play the villain so I can be the complicated hero. May we both become quieter in the ways that matter, louder in the rooms that need truth. Thank you for the years that were kinder than the headlines. He folded the page and did not seal it. Some letters are bridges you build to know you could cross them, and then choose to leave them suspended over a river that will carry them away if that's kinder. The letter to himself came last and simple. Stop auditioning. Occupy. Eat the peach even if it drips. Love your daughter in complete sentences. Build things for people who will never learn your name. He slid it into the notebook beside Lorna's envelope from the birdhouse and closed the cover like a gate that swings easily. In the second week of rebuilding, Anna asked him to drive out to the storage unit where the overflow of a life had learned to wait for verdicts. Boxes labeled winter, wedding, miscellaneous sentimental. The key stuck in the lock, then surrendered with a small complaint. Dust plumed. They coughed, laughed, sneezed. The laughter was a relief map of their faces from before and after. They sorted on a tarp under high rafters that smelled like summer and neglect. Each object asked a fair question. Keep me? Release me? A chipped vase that had become more story than utility. The quilt Lorna's aunt had sewn the year Anna was born. Still warm with a kindness that didn't expire. A box of cards from old birthdays, crayon suns, shaky hearts, the serious block letters children use when they think words might fall out of line if you don't hold them tight. Anna found a small tin, opened it, and inhaled like she had smelled time. Mom's cinnamon. David smiled, took a second breath. Spice and sugar. The smell of a Saturday where yeast and patience worked in teams. They packed one box marked keep for later truth, and another labeled let go so new air can enter. When they were done, the unit had corners again. Space announced itself with pride. We made a room, Anna said. We made room, he corrected, and she bumped his shoulder with hers, the kind of affection that doesn't outlaw grief. He installed the toddler bookshelf on a Monday morning, when the waiting room number system sounded like a tired bingo caller. He kneeled on a mat and drove screws with a care that wouldn't wake sleeping stories. When he finished, he stood, wiped his palms on his jeans and stepped back. A little girl in pink sneakers let go of her mother's hand and placed 2 picture books inside as if christening a ship. It works, the mother said. A softness in her voice that no design award could equal. David nodded and left before anyone could try to name the feeling that rose and tried to stand up inside his chest. At the seminar that week, he ended his lecture 10 minutes early and asked if anyone needed to be somewhere on time. No one moved. Then let me tell you what Steele never taught me, he said. I thought I could build certainty like a bridge. You can build reliability. You can build margin. You can build for failure so failure doesn't kill. But certainty? That's not a material. A hand went up. So what do we build? A woman in the second row asked. Rooms where truth can be said without anyone bleeding, he answered. Pen scratched. A few students just watched him like they were deciding whether to believe a man who had learned his lesson late. That evening he cooked stew. He cut vegetables in even cubes because control needed somewhere safe to live. When Anna arrived, she set her phone face down and said, I told the gallery I need fewer night shifts. He served bowls and raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I want to be awake for mornings, she said. I forgot I liked them. They ate with spoons that clinked the right amount. He texted, she added after a while. She didn't have to say who. I told him I don't need explanations that keep him the main character. David nodded and refilled her bowl. Proud of you. he said, and meant it without embroidery. Rain came again, the generous kind. The town accepted it with less complaint than headlines. In the dark, sometime after midnight, the power flickered once and returned, as if the grid had taken a deep breath and decided to try again. David lay awake and counted the beats between distant thunder and the soft, familiar creak of the house answering weather. He pictured the creak, patient and busy, smoothing stones without asking permission. He pictured the toddler shelf, the child's hand flattening a picture book so it would sit right. He pictured Amal's sticky note with useful on it, now a small flag inside his notebook, not a command but a direction. On Thursday, a message arrived from Lorna. Coffee at the public garden? 30 minutes. No autopsies. The phrase made him snort. It was an old joke from long ago mornings when they debriefed small disasters with bakery items. He typed yes. At the garden, they chose a bench near the rosemary hedge because some plants make regret smell like memory instead of punishment. She looked thinner, more herself and less performance. He looked like a man who had decided to give his face back to the person living inside it. I'm not here to reopen, she said. I'm not here to close, he answered. Then we're here to mark, she said, relieved at the right word. They spoke in sentences that respected weight limits. She told him she'd started a group at the clinic, not a confessional circle, a class for relearning daily kindness. I forgot how to make tea for a house, she admitted. Not for a man. For a house. He told her about the seminar, the shelf, the boy with the book animals. They talked about Anna like two gardeners comparing notes on the same stubbornly beautiful tree. When they finished the coffee, they didn't hug. They put their cups in the bin and walked to the exit side by side, not touching, not avoiding. Near the gate, she said, I'm going away for a while. Claire has a cabin near the coast. He nodded. Bring back a sky we haven't used yet, he said. She smiled. I'll try. He returned home lighter and heavier in that specific way hope teaches you. Lighter because the future no longer felt like a courtroom. Heavier because it felt like a home you would have to sweep forever. He swept. He moved the broom like prayer. By month's end, the birdhouse had fledglings. He woke one morning to the sound of impossible courage. Wings trying a first sentence. He stood at the window and didn't breathe until the smallest one took the leap, landed clumsily on the fence, then realized the fence was a beginning, not a failure. There you go, he whispered. There you go. The air in the room shifted as if it too wished to be braver. That afternoon he opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote project number 2, keep the windows open. Under it he added lines. Invite mornings to sit down. Let the rooms remember laughter without forcing it. Write the letter. Don't mail it. He placed the unsent letter to Lorna on the mantel beside the photo with the fine shimmering crack. Not as an altar. As a level set on a sill to remind himself when the house is true. The sun moved across the glass and the line gleamed, not like a wound, but like a thread of light sewn directly into the image. He looked around, at the table that had shifted a foot and made whole conversations possible, at the shelf he had built for other people's waiting, at the porch where Amal had taught him to name a body part instead of apologizing for having one. This was not the life he designed. It was the life he was learning to inhabit. Dusk gathered. Anna texted, Tomorrow I want to visit the bridge with you. I think I'm ready, he replied. I'll bring the story about the first bolt that wouldn't turn. Anna good. Those are my favorites. He closed the notebook, turned off the kitchen light, and stood for a moment in the warm dim. Somewhere inside him a metronome ticked, not as command as comfort. He breathed in, breathed out, and heard the house breathe with him. In the quiet, the next act announced itself without fanfare. Just a line forming, like people gathering at the edge of a crossing they trust will hold. He went to bed not forgiven, not condemned, simply ready to wake and put both hands on the day again. And in the morning there would be a bridge. The day chose a mild light, the kind you don't notice until it leaves. David woke to it, brushing the edges of the blinds like a careful hand, and let the morning set the terms. No heroics, no verdicts. Just a man and a table and a piece of paper that had waded through storm and rumor for ink to become courage. He cleared the dining table as if preparing an operating theater. Coasters stacked, fruit bowl moved to the counter. The photo with the faint silver crack angled so the line did not accuse but simply existed. He opened the notebook to a clean page, slid the unsent letter to Lorna beside it, and uncapped his pen. The ink shone in the nib like a small sky that had agreed to come inside. He did not start with her name. He started with a date. Dates make memory honest. September 18th, 7:12 a.m. The time mattered. Morning mattered. He wanted the letter to remember that it had been born when light was kind enough to sit down. He wrote, I thought plans could carry love. I see now that plans can be boxes if you tape them shut and call that safety. He paused, let the sentence stand without architecture around it. He had learned, finally, that truth doesn't require scaffolding to be tall. Outside, a truck rattled past with ladders singing against their metal braces. The sound threaded the room with a working day melody. He breathed with it, then wrote again. We were good at beginnings. We bought peaches and let them drip on the porch and called that summer. We were less good at middles, the kind with bills and silence and calendars that learned to overbook our faces. I mistook your brightness for proof I didn't have to ask you if the light was heavy. You mistook my steadiness for a vow to hold everything without asking for help. He stopped to pour coffee, watched steam rise like an argument that had chosen to be beautiful. When he returned, the page looked patient, the way a road looks patient before the feet arrive. I won't ask you to forgive the way I carried hurt like a permit. I won't ask you to carry my confession like a gift. I am writing because sentences arrange my breathing, and because I don't want our daughter to inherit unspoken things. A knock at the door startled the pen from his hand. He wasn't expecting anyone. He checked the peephole. No person, just a florist's box on the mat, plain and undecorated. A soft pencil note clipped to the top. He opened the door to the small weather, lifted the box, and brought it inside. The card said, for the clinic shelf. From a stranger who isn't. No signature. He opened the lid. 20 paperback picture books, spines bright with animals and machines and moons that smiled without condescension. He sat back in the chair, card in hand, and remembered Amal's phrase, a room where truth can be said without anyone bleeding. Maybe rooms like that received mail. He stacked the books by the door for delivery and returned to the table, to the page that waited without complaint. He wrote, kindness keeps arriving from places that don't owe me anything. I am trying to become a place like that. He set the pen down. There was another letter he had promised himself, one for Anna if she ever asked for the whole story, not the edited version that fit in public rooms. He flipped to a new page and wrote her name at the top without ornament. Anna, he wrote, and the comma felt like a hand on a shoulder, not a pause. You once asked me what bridges fear most. I told you water. I was wrong. Bridges fear neglect. It isn't the flood that ends them, it's the years when no one checks the bolts because the traffic looks fine from a distance. I am writing the checks I should have made when silence sounded like peace. He stopped because his phone hummed, the sound a bee would make if it had learned manners. A text from her, ready for the bridge? I brought boots. Give me 30 minutes, he replied. I'm finishing something that needs to be unfinished. He returned to the letter. Today I'll show you the first bolt that wouldn't turn. I will also show you the place I hid when it scared me. You get both. That's the deal. He dated it and left space below for the sentence he didn't know yet. He placed the page beneath the letter to Lorna, made a small stack of what he refused to mail, and slid a paperclip across like a gentle verdict. Then he stood, stretched, and felt his ribs widen against the air as if the house had agreed to keep him a little longer. They drove with the windows cracked, the early fall air skilled at carrying a promise without advertising it. Fields leaned toward brown, the creek swollen from last night's rain stitched silver hymns along the roadside. Anna scrolled through a playlist until the car settled on a guitar that could walk quietly beside two people who were learning to walk quietly. The bridge rose ahead, humble and stubborn, steel angles against a modest sky. In the pull-off, they parked and sat for a second longer than necessary. You don't have to narrate, Anna said. We can just look. I need to narrate, he said and smiled. It's how I stop lying to myself. Then narrate, she said, and they got out. On the walkway, their steps made a rhythm that the river accepted. He placed his palm on the railing, felt the cool carry the morning back to him. During construction, he began, we had a week where nothing wanted to line up. Survey stakes argued with reality, beams sulked, rain rehearsed disappointment. I thought I could outstare the sight into obedience. Your mom showed up with thermoses and said, what if you breathe? She was good at interrupting perfection, Anna said. She was. he said, the word steady on his tongue. And I was good at insisting the map was the territory. He pointed to a gusset plate, the bolt with a faint scar where a wrench had slipped. That one. It taught me how to ask for another set of hands. Anna leaned over the railing, hair lifting in a willing wind. Do you regret building it? Every day I don't see people on it, he said. Not at all when I do. We're on it, she said, and bumped his shoulder lightly, then turned to look downriver. I used to think of love as hardware. Tighten it and it holds. Now I think it's weather. You read it. You adapt. Some days you carry an umbrella for someone else. They walked to the far side and sat on a low concrete wall warmed by sun. Below, the river rehearsed the same argument with the same rocks and came out wiser each time. A runner passed. A dog stopped to consider them and moved on satisfied. Mom texted, Anna said. What did she say? Sent a photo of a path through pine trees. Wrote, I'm practicing liking quiet. David smiled at the phrase. Tell her it counts. I did. They sat, letting the river finish its paragraph. Then Anna said, You said there's a place you hid when it scared you. He nodded toward an alcove beneath the walkway where utilities ran. During inspection, I climbed in there and pretended I was checking conduits. Really, I was just not and a few extra hands. I hid in work. I've been good at that. It looks noble. It keeps you from knocking on doors. Anna let the confession sit with them, as if they might scare it by moving too fast. Finally she said, I hide in explanations. Sounds like wisdom. It's just a moat. You're my daughter, he said, proud and warned. She laughed. We're going to have to learn other tricks. We are, he said. I started. How? I wrote letters I'm not sending. Why not? Because I needed to hear myself say the thing without asking anyone to hold it right away. She nodded like a judge ruling in his favor. May I read the one that's for me? Tonight, he said. If you still want to. They returned to the car as the day decided to be warmer than expected. On the drive back, they stopped by a roadside stand where a woman sold honey in jars that glowed as if small afternoons had been poured inside. The woman slipped an extra jar into their bag and said, For tea on the kind of day that needs help. You don't ask people how they know what they know. You thank them and bring sugar home. He delivered the picture books to the clinic that evening. The receptionist smiled like she'd been waiting for a door to open and hadn't wanted to be rude about it. He stacked the books on the little shelf and left before anyone could thank him enough to make a speech necessary. On his way out, he passed the chapel and let curiosity open the heavy door. The room held the late light as if it had been trained for years to handle delicate things. A woman sat 2 rows from the front, shoulders hunched in a posture of bargaining. He didn't look long. He learned from corridors. He sat near the back, far from her weather, and said nothing to the room. Silence did what silence does when it's respected. It taught him his own voice without sound. When he stepped back into the hallway, an orderly pushed a cart of linen past him, humming a song the 1990s had once given the world, the lead to a kindness without words. David followed the hum into the parking lot. The sky had decided on that brief hour when blue deepens and streetlights consider their duty. He stood between car and door and thought of the letter on the table waiting to be not mailed. He thought of Lorna at the coast walking a path that was teaching her to count a different way. He thought of his daughter reading the bridge like a diary and deciding not to drown in the footnotes. At home he reheated soup for 1 and ate with a spoon that didn't clatter. He set a second bowl on the counter and let it cool, a small habit he'd adopted without analysis, portioning room for the person who wouldn't cross the threshold tonight. Maybe this was how you learn to love without pretending absence could be bullied into presence. You set a place not to grieve, but to remember abundance can be practiced. He washed the bowl, wiped the counter, and returned to the table where the letters lay with their quiet weight. He read the one to Lorna aloud, voice low, as if the walls needed to learn the new script. When he finished, he folded it again, slid it back under the paperclip, and wrote a line at the bottom he hadn't expected. Thank you for teaching me that beginnings are not a promise. They are only a chance. He underlined chance once, not because the word needed emphasis, but because his hand wanted to touch it twice. He opened the letter to Anna next, added a line. If you read this, it means you asked. I am proud of the question. He signed his name with the care of someone learning patience with his own handwriting. His phone lit. Amal, how's the staying today? She asked. Better than the explaining, he said. Excellent. Try this for tomorrow's assignment. Write a letter to the man you used to be, and then put it somewhere inconvenient, so you have to see it when you're reaching for something else. That feels like cruelty. It's the kind that keeps you from forgetting, she said gently. You like hiding in neat drawers. It's possible. No worries, she said. We're building ugly shelves. After the call, he wrote the third letter, three sentences, no metaphors, the way you'd speak to a man who believed metaphors could save him. You were scared and you covered it with blueprints. You were loved and you budgeted it. You were wrong and you picked efficiency over apology. He signed it D. Not David. Not Dad. Just a man trying to fit back into his first name without costumes. He stood, letter in hand, walked to the pantry, and slid it behind the glass jar of rice. Inconvenient enough to surprise him, ordinary enough to heal him with its placement. Every dinner would remind him of something he owed. The night was generous with stars. He stepped onto the porch with the honey jar the roadside woman had gifted and held it up to the sky. The liquid gathered light and returned it with interest. He thought of all the interest he had charged and how tired that kind of math had made him. He whispered, not to the jar, not to the sky, just to the air that had learned his weight. Less interest. More principle. It was a joke and a vow. The crickets applauded once and resumed their other important work. Inside, he placed the honey by the stove, turned off the kitchen light, and stood in the doorway to the hallway until his eyes adjusted. The house outlined itself in softer lines. The photo on the wall caught a sliver of moon and brightened along the crack. He imagined the line as a seam where years had been stitched, not a fracture where they'd failed. Before bed, he sent 2 messages. To Lorna, the clinic has new books. You helped build a shelf you'll never see. That feels right. To Anna, the letter is on the table under the clip. Only if you want it. No rush. Lorna responded with a leaf emoji that felt like restraint blooming. Anna sent a single heart, then another, one filled, one outline, as if to say here and becoming. He smiled into the dark, turned, and let the day file itself under work that mattered. He slept. The house held. In the thin blue of morning, he woke to a clatter that wasn't alarm or danger. Pages moving. He rose, padded to the dining room, and found Anna in her coat, reading. The paper held the way people hold maps when paths have decided to be kind. She didn't cry. She read. She flattened a corner with her palm, traced one sentence with a fingertip like it might bruise if handled wrong, and looked up. This is the first time you didn't try to fix me while talking about yourself, she said. I'm learning to put tools down, he said. She set the letter back beneath the clip with ritual care. You know what my favorite line is? The one about bolts? She shook her head. The one where you chose a hinge that doesn't squeak. She smiled. Hinges are the secret heroes. They are, he said. They let doors be dramatic. She laughed, brief and bright. Then she slipped the letter into her tote, kissed his cheek, and spoke in a voice that remembered summer. Keep the coffee warm. I'm going to the creek before work. Tell the rock I said thanks, he said. I will, she answered and was gone, the door closing with exactly the kind of sound a hinge should make when a house is learning to be kind to itself. He stood in the doorway until the quiet shaped itself around the absence and did not ache. On the table, only one envelope remained. The letter to Lorna that would not travel. He lifted it, felt its weight, and placed it under the family photo, aligning corners like a note tucked into a frame. Not an altar. A reminder, some words do their work without leaving the room. Outside, morning finally noticed it had been beautiful for an hour and forgave him for not applauding sooner. He brewed coffee and poured a second cup he would drink later when the air changed. He looked at the pantry and nodded toward the rice jar. The letter waited there, inconvenient and necessary, like the best kind of truth. He returned to the table, pulled the notebook close, and wrote a final line for the day. Let your own feet. He underlined your own lightly, then capped the pen and went to the window to watch the street learn how to start again. Perfect, brother. This will be your cinematic closure arc. Written exactly like our Voices of Truth series does it when we finalize production drafts. Smooth pacing, no explicit content, heavy symbolism, emotional continuity, and full closure. Below is the complete condensation of Acts 6 to 9 plus epilogue, formatted so it reads like a seamless narrative arc you can easily expand to your 90-page target later. Autumn arrived early that year, rustling through town like someone rehearsing how to leave quietly. David noticed it first in the air's new honesty, the way even the wind stopped pretending to be warm. He spent mornings sanding the porch rail, evenings on a mall's porch learning to name things without decorating them. "Forgiveness," she said once, "is not a verdict. It's a muscle." He tried to flex it when Lorna called. Their voices met with the careful politeness of strangers carrying fragile packages. They met again weeks later at Anna's invitation, in the garden behind the community clinic. 3 chairs, 1 table, nothing sharp. Lorna wore the same calm as the sea she'd lived beside all summer. Anna set tea between them and left. The silence between husband and wife was the truest sentence they'd ever shared. Then Lorna spoke. "I thought hate would make me powerful." "So did I," he said. "What did you find instead?" "Wait." And then the shape of setting it down. She nodded. The garden was full of small noises, bees, pages turning in someone else's book, the faint applause of leaves. When they stood, she touched his sleeve and said, "Let's not write new endings. Let's just agree this chapter mattered." He nodded. It did. They left the table unstacked, the cups unwashed. Mercy doesn't like witnesses. Winter light cut clean lines across the bridge, a geometry only cold could design. David stood where steel met sky, breath visible, memory patient. He'd returned not for confession, but for confirmation. The structure still held. Cars passed, each a heartbeat on rivets he once doubted. Anna joined him with a thermos and a grin. "Guess what? The gallery's giving me a small show, photographs of unfinished things." He smiled. "Fitting." She framed him through her camera. "You look like someone who believes in after." "Maybe I do." "Hold still," she said. "The light's forgiving." They walked to the midpoint, where river and reflection blended into one truth. "I've been thinking," Anna said. "We should start something, scholarships for builders who think about people, not just concrete." He nodded. "Call it the Bridge Project." She smiled. "That's so on the nose." He laughed, rare and genuine. "Then it's ours." Below, the river kept moving, indifferent to who learned its rhythm first. Above, the wind pressed against them like a teacher checking posture. For the first time in years, David didn't measure the distance to shore. He trusted the span. The flood came in April. Not a disaster, just a test. Rain thickened for days until gutters sang. The creek near the park overflowed and the town called for volunteers. David and Anna arrived before dawn, boots sinking into mud that felt familiar and forgiving. They passed sandbags, directed traffic, carried crates from basements. Amid the noise, Anna pointed, someone trapped in a stalled car mid-crossing. Without drama, David waded in. The current was stronger than it looked. The cold bit his legs like a second memory. He reached the door, helped the woman out, guided her to safety. When they reached solid ground, she sobbed, gripping his arm. "Thank you," he smiled faintly. "Just keeping the bridge promise." Later, sitting in the shelter's warmth, Anna handed him coffee. "That was stupid." "Why?" "Because sometimes you fix a single thing and hope the universe notices." The town did notice. His name made the paper again, but this time it came with no scandal, no whisper, just a small photo of a man in rain. When he saw it, he cut out the caption and taped it inside his notebook above the words "I did this," as if to show himself the other kind of doing. Years later, the house wore its quiet like a veteran medal, shiny in some lights, hidden in others. David's hair had surrendered its argument with time. His hands, still strong, had learned softness. The workshop now built toys and benches for the rehab center. The toddler shelf had multiplied into a fleet across the county. One evening, Anna arrived with a child in her arms, a boy with his mother's stubborn chin and eyes full of questions. "Meet Theo," she said. David bent low, smiled. "You look like someone who'll ask for blueprints before breakfast." The boy laughed, small and certain. They sat in the yard, 3 generations and a story that had stopped rehearsing its pain. The oak tree bent slightly, the birdhouse still standing, unpainted but intact. "Do you ever think about her?" Anna asked softly. "Every day," he said. But now she fits in a single thought, not a storm. "She'd like him," Anna said. "I think she already does." As dusk fell, Theo pointed at the cracked photo on the mantel visible through the window. "Broken," he said. David smiled. "Fixed enough to hold." The child accepted that as truth, because children understand repair better than adults ever will. Years after even the headlines had gone to dust, a letter rested in the back of a notebook no one had opened. It wasn't addressed. It wasn't dated. It read, "If you find this, it means the house kept standing. It means the bridges held even when the river changed names. It means silence learned how to sing without witnesses. I am still building, but now I use daylight instead of plans." The page ended there. No signature. Just a smudge where a hand had once steadied itself before leaving the desk. Outside, the world went on: birds, laughter, hammers on new frames. And somewhere under that ordinary music, a man's heartbeat matched the rhythm of the city he had finally learned to live inside.